talking in class about a project for the end of the semester, and we were talking about trying to raise awareness and really have real conversations, honest conversations about white supremacy. I came up, or I don't know where it came up with the idea of the dark side of whiteness as the title. And I think what that really suggests is that, I mean, it's a play with the word, right? And that whiteness is actually a condition of colonial imperialist society, a Western society, and imposing political, military, economic, cultural domination on other peoples and cultures around the world. And that has come at the cost of a lot of life and a lot of environmental damage and the loss of culture, genocide, and cultural genocide and human genocide. So a pretty dark story, right? All for the sake of preserving something called whiteness. Crowdsourced this one, and we came up with the title. There were three ideas: still fighting, resistance, and still here. And so the words "still fighting" are in one of the canvases, and so we titled the exhibit "Still Here: Native American Resistance and Survival," because the class wanted to emphasize the fact that throughout contact with European, white supremacy and colonialism, slavery, capitalism, Native peoples, indigenous peoples have resisted those forces and the invasion from outside. And their mere survival is really testament to the power of resistance. There's a tendency, especially I think among people in the dominant group, white folks, to pity or have this kind of, oh, this is so tragic, so sad, and look down on people who have been exploited, damaged, etc., traumatized. Maybe not consciously or intentionally, but nonetheless, that's kind of the impact. So we wanted to really celebrate and acknowledge the resistance and the survival and the strength it takes. Well, it'd probably be a little bit of an academic answer, but I think it's also going to be an emotional answer. For me, the understanding of white supremacy is it's a system of domination. It's an ideology that was created to maintain control. But it was created by Europeans and Americans, white Americans of European descent, as an ideology to justify the subordination of people who are defined outside of this category of whiteness. And along with white supremacy comes the very idea of race as a thing. It's not a biological fact, but it is a socially constructed ideology that has been used and weaponized for centuries now. To justify slavery, genocide, annexation, colonialism, imperialism, and all of that.
To me, white supremacy means the control of power in society. A lot of the research that I've done myself, it all talks about the dominant group in society being white male. Whether it's in leadership or in politics or in the economy, it's always white males that are in the dominant group making a lot of the decisions for everybody else. And coming from a developing country that was colonized, we don't experience it that much anymore because, for the lack of a better term, the white man is gone. But because the US is such a powerhouse in the world, what's happening here is filtering to every other country. And so what we would think was starting to be dormant is no longer dormant. And I think white supremacy is something that really needs to be talked about in the open and understood, especially in the times that we're living in now.
The other thing that white supremacy means to me is it's a big lie. And when you start to realize the lies you've been taught and realize that this story that has held society and the telling of history together is a fabrication that has cost so much to so many people, it's painful. It's something that I feel a great deal of grief and anger around, and yeah, and rage around the fact that it's so interwoven into everything that we do in this country. Because, well, first of all, power defines the narrative that we learn in history and we learn in our curriculum. And we have for forever told the story of people in power. That's what's on our plaques, that's what's on our statues, that's what's on our syllabus. Those are the books, those are the things that people write about. I think it's important, and there is increasing attention to this, but I really think that the voices of the people who have survived and stood in resistance to power we need to decenter power and put those voices in the middle. Because, I think actually those stories are more important. They speak to the human condition. They connect us and bind us in ways that power doesn't. We tend to sometimes think of ourselves as aligned with power or aspiring to power, but in fact, when we think about resilience and survival and making do and pulling yourself up and getting through stuff, those kind of stories, that's what connects us to each other, right? And that's what is our shared humanity, not this domination and control of people. So that's why I think we have to look at those stories. And a lot of them aren't published. A lot of the resistance stories aren't published. So we are kind of at a disadvantage. We can only really hear the stories of those that get into books or articles or films. But I do think that a lot of everyday people have these same sort of stories of resistance, and we have to value those as well. So that's, I think everyday people make history.
Because of the power that goes along with white supremacy, it's important to understand what can be done to fight it. And a lot of the time we learn about the powers that be, but not, and what was conquered and taken, but not what was fought for and earned back by the people. And not just in history, but even now, there are small victories that should be celebrated when it's by a minority or by women, because a lot of my research is also gender, which is also an oppressed group. Women are oppressed just as people of color are. And so it's important that the news and research and all of these outlets don't just focus on what's happening that's bad because of white supremacy or giving it more power, like adding fuel to the fire. It's important to recognize the people who are standing up against it and what they must be going through and their fight and how you can be part of it, I think. So the more that the resistance is made known and celebrated, the more that it could probably happen.
The event in my canvas represents climate change kind of as a whole and its effect on Native Americans. Sexual violence against Native American women, it's important because it's been done for many years, decades, and it's just becoming a topic that people are starting to talk about, even though many of the crimes still aren't solved in the court system.
One, the topic is miscategorization and the whitewashing of Native Americans.
And it's involved in every part of their everyday lives.
My topic is language loss and then the resurgence of language. And it's important because a lot of the Native American languages are being lost through time and through domination of other cultures. So it's important to depict that on the canvases.
My canvas, I'm doing sterilization, and it's important because, for one, we need more people in this world, duh. So we need to reproduce, but I feel like it's important for us to have more than just white people in this world. That's just me.
Christopher Columbus came over with 32 men and tried to colonize the land and take over. So he left the men there and went back to Spain, I believe. And when he came back, he seen that the 32 men were killed, and they were rightfully killed because they tried to take over the Taino people's land.
To me, this is an extremely important topic to talk about because not only were so many Native Americans genocided, but to further extend erasing their existence, many people attempt to try to erase who they were in history. So not only physically removing them, but also removing their presence as a whole in history. And that shouldn't be tolerated at all. I think that sovereignty is important because it's important to not only tell the story of, all the terrible things that happened, but also to understand that there are so many that have resisted and still are resisting today, and so many that still face hate and racism, but they're still here and they're still rising up against it.
The topic on my canvas is the Taino people from the Caribbean islands. They were an indigenous group who had their own land, and
I feel like it's important, and it's been an important topic in our class because the indigenous way of life revolves around respect and use of all of our natural resources. I feel like, it's only, that's every woman's God-given right to reproduce, and if you take it away from them, that's just wrong. And I feel like it's no say-so in what people can and can't have kids. That's a fucked up. I'm sorry, that is.
And after that, it was just an ongoing battle between resistance from the Taino people and Christopher Columbus and his men.
I think it's important to talk about because, how what world we live in. White people basically ruled the world. Even though we see it with our eyes and, people go through stuff, I still think it's just important to talk about.
It's another avenue in which white culture has taken away or damaged something that is so incredibly important to them.
White supremacy to me is about power, so generally white power, and their fear of losing that power to other ethnicities and races.
The topic of my canvas is boarding schools, and I thought it was really important after taking the class because we talked about how the boarding schools would take away the Native children, and also it would change their view of self-identity. So I thought it was important to show that actual happening.
I think of white supremacy, I think of KKK, slavery, the government, money, everything that kind of involves white supremacy.
White supremacy to me, it's basically one culture dominating the other cultures by force through things like obviously genocide and trying to convert them to their customs, which it's just really wrong.
White supremacy to me is cowardly, and I feel that it comes from a place of fear of being wiped out and of white power being taken away from the white race. And that's why they perpetuate the hate that they do, so that they can keep their power.
White supremacy is the root of slavery, genocide, capitalism, and oppression against most marginalized communities, and is used as a tool to create dominance and systematic separation.
I think white supremacy to me means the separation and categorization of human beings as a way to separate a community that could be whole and work together, but rather keeping it in these distinct parts that are arranged in some sort of hierarchy that's not based in anything other than what white culture has deemed.
It's still very present today, and to me, it doesn't mean much to me. I think the most important part is just fighting against it, because it's always going to be present in our culture, our country, because that's what it was founded off of. But the most important part about white supremacy is just dismantling it and transforming the systems that was built off of it.
I think it's important to talk about white supremacy because it's basically the set of morals and beliefs that a lot of racists have, and for that to be their core beliefs, I feel like we should understand them to understand how they're thinking, and also like ways we can prevent that from happening or leading to racist acts.
A lot of the institutions that we grow up in and have to deal with, white supremacy is just naturally perpetuated. So I think it's important to understand what it is and understand the language so you know how to decode when people use white supremacist type of language. But I think it's important to talk about the resistance so that we could keep on building up strength and do the same for the generations after us so that they don't feel like they're hopeless, because we're not.
I think it's important to talk about resistance because resistance is the strongest tool that we have to fight against white supremacy. Without our resistance, white supremacy would win, basically, if we didn't fight back. And we are the collective, so we have the power, and resistance is our most valuable tool, and that's the only way we can keep going head to head with white supremacy and the systems that it creates.
I think it's important to talk about those two intertwined because it's important to show how no matter how hard white supremacy has been trying to beat into everything that our culture is, the people who are being beaten down by it haven't taken it laying down. At every step along the way, they have stood up for themselves and defended who they are and what they are. And I think that's important going forward to show that there is hope, and we need to continue encouraging that resistance so we can hopefully someday make some sort of change and make an impact in this whole mess that has been created.
And I think it's important to talk about resistance when we mention white supremacy so we don't exploit the cultures that are marginalized and show that they are fighting back and they aren't sitting there and taking anything.
I think it's important to talk about both because it's not really discussed. The term isn't in a lot of classes, so I think it's important to talk about that, but also that there is resistance to it, that it's not just pitying other cultures, that they did fight back. So it's important to talk about both.
I feel like it's very important to talk about white supremacy and the resistance against it because even though it's still a topic that I don't enjoy talking about, it's very important to know that there were a whole bunch of resistance going up against it, like in forms of brutality against the system.
I think it's important because it's something that has affected many people throughout the years. It's something that has caused murder, rape, just a whole bunch of evilness in the world. So it's something that we need to resist, and something that's in our school systems that's built up throughout and has to be stopped.
It was really important to focus on the resistance so that people can appreciate their other cultures.
They call it a pipeline, but those on the front lines know that black snake was sent for us to grow, to shed the skin our ancestors pray, of wounds old and calloused, so that we may stay, so that we may unite, unity our tool. No weapons are found in this court of rule. Men becoming ki'ai, steadfast in their guard, protecting women's hearts as their song become roots, roots to cast out healing for all sentient beings, to honor sacred mother, heart forward we heal. The salmon will run, the mauna will breathe, the rivers will flow, the rainbow rainbow is here, and prophecy tells us all generations will hear.
Stand up with the First Nations and our people that been living here for thousands of years. Stand up. We've been fighting for our freedom since the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. Stand up. Like Geronimo, Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier. Stand up. Now they poisoning the waters for our sons and our daughters, so we on the frontier. We won. One nation, one cause, one people, one tribe. Now it's us against the pipeline. Get on your feet for Standing Rock, and we'll show you how strong we could be when we unify.
To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, 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 stand up.
From the beginning we was winning this game on planet Earth. It's been spinning, we've been living and dying, but giving birth the first of many nations. Celebrating them days when all that got made came after what God made. These days we cater to these internet memes, internet streams. It seems them streams aren't clean. We need the whole story seen where hassling before water has gasoline in it. Malcolm X moment, Martin Luther King with a dream and war boning. Wounded knee plus Alcatraz, doggone it. This is for the rock, with prayers we stand on it.
Oh yeah, we playing on it, the earth we camp on it. In a sweat lodge singing our songs with grandfathers. Heat rocks all in the spot, we splash on them with a beatbox from my boy, we jam on it. Said a prayer for the black snake killers. Train on the front lines, they you're the realest. Stand for your people, stand for your family. Stand with Standing Rock, stand for humanity. Hey.
It takes a group of people who actually care about Mother Earth and life and water being sacred and the land being sacred to say, we stand up.
To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, stand up, stand up.
Mini Wachoni, water is life.
Mini Wachoni.
Water is life.
Water is life. Water is life.
Water is life.
I stand with Standing Rock.
I stand with Standing Rock.
I stand with Standing Rock. Stand up. Stand up.
Stand up.
Stand up.
I stand with Standing Rock. Stand up.
To all my native people,
Woke up the giant, we won't go quiet.
to all my tribal people,
Don't mistake our peace as we stand defiant.
to all my native people,
It's the calm before the storm, and I can hear it coming.
to all my tribal people.
I'm ready for the battle when we ain't running.
Stand up, 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 Standing Rock, Standing Rock, stand up, 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 Standing Rock, Standing Rock.
Standing Rock, we're standing feet as history is on a sad repeat. Is it liberty or we just acting free as our land depletes from these hands of greed? See, fate is found, how we face the hounds. Take a vow for these sacred grounds. Make a sound that'll shake us out. Say aloud what can save us now.